So I've avoided making a video on the topic of the Rings of Power for quite a while. Basically since news first came out, what was it, like a year or two ago? I wasn't happy with the first teaser that showed the main characters of the story, but I was willing to fall in with the crowd of people who say, wait until the series comes out before you judge it. But here we are about a week away from the series premiere, or maybe it's coming out this week, I can't remember. But I've seen more and more trailers and read a lot of comments from the showrunners addressing the concerns that fans have had. As a Tolkien fan, someone who has been reading the books since I was 8 or 9, so for about 20 years, I grow more and more concerned with this adaptation of his work. Not just because of the very obvious changes that have been made in terms of the race of certain characters, but making prominent characters that didn't even exist in Tolkien's work, or having things like hobbits in the story, even though they weren't known in Middle-earth during the Second Age. So I think there's definitely valid complaints that you can make without having actually watched the show, because you can see the errors with your own eyes. And I think a lot of the indignation from the fans stems from the fact that the showrunners have been moving the goalposts in terms of their answers to concerns over the show as we've gotten closer to the premiere. At the very beginning, they seemed genuinely passionate about Tolkien's work and seemed very keen on the idea of faithfully adapting it for this Amazon series. In contrast to more recent comments where members of the creative team have stated that it made sense to them that this show reflects the modern world, or some of the actors' comments about how this show is bringing much needed diversity to the genre. I'll definitely get into more of these comments, maybe even fact-checking some of the things that the creative teams have said as I review the series. But right now, what you're seeing is this huge backlash on the part of some of the people behind the series, as well as a number of media outlets against some very passionate fans who have called out the inaccuracies of the show. Typically calling fans toxic and racist and sexist and all of these things simply for saying, hey, this isn't what Tolkien wrote. Are there legitimately racist fans out there? Maybe. But all the arguments against the show that I've seen use Tolkien's own words, cited passages from his work, and I completely understand the disappointment, not only in the show itself, but in Amazon's reaction to fans' disappointment. But I think what sometimes bothers me the most are the reactions of people defending the changes to Tolkien's work who seem to not really be fans, as instead of backing their arguments up by citing his work, they bring up the importance of diversity and representation and say that the changes are necessary to reflect the modern world, which in my opinion completely misses the point of the stories. Even though diversity has a part to play in Tolkien's world, the terms diversity, representation, and inclusivity, the way those terms are thrown around today has nothing to do with these stories. To all the people who complain about not being able to enjoy certain entertainments because they feel excluded due to their skin color, I don't think they think about the fact that they don't live in a non-homogeneous society. Non-homogeneous societies, which ironically were founded by white people, places such as the US, the UK, Scandinavian countries, basically the Western culture first world countries, which are also the most diverse countries in the world, is where you'll find the most people who complain about the lack of diversity in entertainment. The majority of homogeneous countries are found in Asia, Africa, and South America to a degree. If you look at their myths and stories, they almost without exception only include myths and stories pertaining to their people, meaning mono-ethnic cultural tales. You can complain all you want that a story told in modern day should reflect the modern culture or reflect the diversity that you see around you. But Tolkien wasn't writing about America. He wasn't even writing about modern Britain. He was writing about a prehistory Britain back when there were various races, but the differences in those races didn't have to do with skin color, but rather creation and in some cases magical ability. All these people complaining about the lack of diversity don't seem to grasp the concept that despite the fact that they live in a culturally diverse environment, the movie and TV adaptations they tend to complain about are based on Western stories and myths that were created by and for mostly homogeneous white cultures. This will be a controversial statement, but if you're not white, these stories weren't made for you, just as Chinese or Aztec myths weren't made for me. That doesn't mean that I can't enjoy them. It just means that they weren't made for my specific cultural tastes or other cultural tastes of a lot of other cultures. And that's okay. Again, that doesn't mean that other people can't enjoy something just because it wasn't made for them. What's not okay is asking that other cultures change their stories to suit your modern sensibilities. It makes as much sense to have black actors portray Norse mythological characters or prominent characters in Tolkien's work as it would be for me to be cast in a television or movie adaptation of an African myth as a white man. Like what they did with Gods of Egypt. Having Gerard Butler portray an Egyptian god was fucking stupid. To those who say that stories should be reshaped or adapted to fit the modern audience or changed to reflect the diversity of the modern world, no, they shouldn't. They just shouldn't. And that applies to all myths and all stories that weren't created with the intention of reflecting current day American culture. There are also two reasons I can think of why Tolkien wouldn't have wanted that. One, Tolkien was big on escapism. He thought that with all the hardships of life, that escapism was extremely important for adults and children alike. He didn't create The Lord of the Rings to reflect modern day politics nor his own sociopolitical attitude at the time. He didn't even intend for his work to be allegorical, though many see it that way. And two, as I've mentioned before and will mention many more times, Tolkien created this work in the hopes that he could create myths for England that would one day be as popular and prevalent as the Norse and Greek myths. You say an adaptation should reflect the modern day, but I don't think it should. His story wasn't meant to contain prominent characters of every race. That's not why Tolkien wrote it. He didn't have a diversity quota in mind when he wrote the first line, "In a hole lived a hobbit." He just wanted to tell a story that included a language of his own creation, a language that led to a universe that he so carefully crafted. If any of the people wanting to ruin this man's work applied a single ounce of the passion and discipline that Tolkien put into his work into creating original stories about Black, Asian, Hispanic, gay, trans, whatever culture you want, or correctly adapting myths from those cultures, maybe you wouldn't be such purposeless, miserable people, and everybody would get what they want. But that's unlikely to happen. These people who want to believe that creators and characters of popular stories and franchises are just as woke as they are, and so they twist those creators' ideas around in their heads. For most of those people, that twisted fantasy simply remains fantasy. But some of them manage to worm their way into the entertainment industry, into a creative position where they have control of someone else's story, where they then can tell a revisionist version of that story to suit what they thought the story should be instead of faithfully adapting the story as it was written. I still have a lot to learn about Tolkien's work myself. So before you make your stupid comments, before you call a fan a racist, which is a pretty terrible thing to say, maybe do some research into the lore, read the books, or just admit that you never cared about being true to the story in the first place. Most of the people defending the Rings of Power, I think, want a modern take on Tolkien's work. I just want Tolkien's work as it was written. I think the important argument isn't necessarily just between the toxic fandom and woke culture. I think it boils down to people who appreciate something for what it is versus people who can only enjoy something by turning it into something that it isn't while claiming that that's the way it always was. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that like and subscribe button. Also hit that notification bell so you never miss out on a new video. I'll see y'all next time.